Breaking news. Can you hear that emergency siren? Everton have been hit with a Premier League record 10-point deduction today. And that's why we're coming to you to discuss everything and giving you the lowdown in this emergency podcast. Roll the intro. Yes, hello and welcome to the Lost in Possession podcast. Even though it is the international break, that has not stopped teams changing their position in the Premier League table, with Everton now in the relegation zone following that record-breaking 10-point deduction they were given today. So we're going to discuss all things of this points deduction, why Everton have been hit with such a strong number, and what this means not only for Everton but also the rest of the league as well, particularly with other investigations, i.e. Chelsea and Man City. So let's get the ball rolling. Jordan, just tell us a little bit more about what Everton have breached, or what the Premier League has say they have breached, and what they've been found guilty of, etc.
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, what a shock. I mean, I know there was investigations and there is ongoing across a number of clubs, but I don't think anyone saw this coming. As you said, it's the biggest deduction in history. It's only ever happened 3 times before in Premier League history. So this is genuinely, groundbreaking. So from my understanding of basically what they've done, it's actually a breach of the profit and sustainability rules within the Premier League. So we'll obviously get onto the other clubs, but it is important to note that is the reason. It's not necessarily about FFP and all the other charges. We'll obviously get into that. But ultimately, what it looks like they've done is overspent on the new stadium and effectively lost even more money than the league thresholds allow you to lose. So the question and obviously the debate will go on, but initial reaction, this is pretty crazy. Of course, Everton are going to fight it as they should and as any club should, but they will be basically arguing, you had the COVID era. Their argument is basically that they've got justifiable mitigation to say, look, we did lose this money, we did go above the threshold, but there is fair and reasonable explanation for that. That's essentially Everton's argument. What this means for the league is, as you said, it puts them in the relegation zone. So we all know Everton not been relegated. We've seen how close they've come to relegation. This is a massive blow for the club. And it will be really interesting to see if their appeals are successful, because if they're not, suddenly Sean Dyche has a massive job in his hands to keep this club up.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. That, as we said, that does drop Everton down to 19th on now 4 points. But they have only lost 1 in their last 5 games, and they are still just 2 points off Luton in 17th. But I think it's the overall snowball effect of everything that's gone on. Everton feel, right, I suppose, rightly aggrieved that COVID wasn't taken into account, where they couldn't really sell players for the money they wanted. But you could also argue that they haven't really got players that they can sell for a profit in some ways. They've bought terribly over the last few years, absolutely terribly. And all those come into account. And of course, with this new stadium coming up, which is due, I believe, next season, they've been flirting with relegation for a long time. So they've had no real money to come into it. They've, of course, not gone through a bank to get that loan to help fund the stadium, which I think has also triggered part of this reasoning for the 10-point deduction. But just overall, where would we, this beats the 9-point deduction Portsmouth got when they're in the Premier League, I believe around 2009, 2010, which ultimately saw them get relegated. Do we think, what is the significance of this, would we say? What do you think this sets a precedent to the whole league? Do you think a few teams are going to be looking nervously over their shoulder?
Well, yes, because this is the first time the Premier League have actually done something really on the sort of since FFP have come in. So to see them actually put in a 10-point deduction is something that probably, I don't know, it was rumoured before, like I think about a month or so ago, of like a maximum of 12 points. So obviously they've gone with 10, which isn't far off. It does set up sort of, there's the benchmark. other clubs, if you do the same, you're going to be hit with that. That's if Everton don't win their appeal, obviously. I think the snowballing effect, as I think Jordan said, this could get even worse because you've got Leeds, Leicester, and Burnley and Southampton all sort of been relegated in previous seasons, could actually take legal action against Everton if this goes through, because the time that it happened was in the 2021 season, like this when they first broke it. So it's been an ongoing investigation for a few years. So the fact is there could be legal action where the clubs could be compensated who have gone down already. So this could add to Everton's woes, which means even less money for the transfer market. Might even have to completely sell players. Like you said, Reece, they might not. They don't have. I don't think they have many massive players that can go for a lot of money, but they might have to sell them for fairly cheap just to keep the money afloat, really. So it's something that could really spiral against Everton, and the fact that they've got this new stadium, they've got debt from it, and that could even impede them even further. So it could be worrying times for Everton. However, I think if you actually look at the sort of past few seasons, this is probably the season Everton wanted the point deduction, because they are better than probably at least four teams in this league, and they're the four teams that are in the bottom sort of roughly around the bottom. So actually, it could be sort of like a bit of a blessing that they've got it this season rather than last season where they would have been relegated and Leicester would have stayed up.
That's a very good point. And Jordan, this one's for you. You say that Everton would be delighted to have this now, right? If you think last year they survived by the skin of their teeth, year before, or whatever. Why is it taking this long, do you think? Because would you feel that teams like Leeds and Leicester would be rightly aggrieved? You know, because really they would argue, well, that would be us in the Premier League if that would have been acted upon quicker. Because I know not everything's been taken into account, but they had been, hemorrhaging a lot of money over a good amount of time.
Yeah, I think as a club in general, we've said, and we've said it before on the podcast, that they are not well run. So this Everton being run like a shambles isn't a surprise in itself, but this coming out is definitely a surprise. I think it's hard for us and a lot of fans to comment on the time it's taken. As we don't, as fans, we don't get much insight into how long this process takes and what criteria needs to be met, what decisions, panels, and various other elements need to get involved. So I think it's hard for us to unpick the timing. But you're right. Like, although Jamie, you say it, I can't imagine a situation where those clubs can genuinely take legal action and it will be successful. I think.
Why? Because I see if the appeal fails, I don't think they've got any standing, because it's such loss of revenue for these clubs. I think they'll easily win legal cases against them.
So
Yeah,
Leeds, Leicester, Burnley, and Southampton are the teams that are expected to take legal action. They've got 28 days to pursue this claim. So they're going to go for it, because Jamie's right. They're going to argue they've lost a lot of money here. Realistically, I look at those four teams and went, well, you got relegated because you put yourselves in that mess anyway. Like, you couldn't you couldn't overtake one of the worst Everton sides we've ever seen. Like, come on now. But that's a different matter. But if you talk about the time frame of things, under the Premier League rules, clubs are allowed to lose a maximum of £105 million over the 3 years. That's why it takes a long time, because if you can't get punished for 1 year, you can't get punished for 2, it has to be over that period. However, the commission that investigated this found that Everton had overreached their allowed losses by £19.5 million. That's shocking. That is shocking.
Sorry to jump in, but to the point about this appeal, right? Does Everton spending or losing £19 million more on a stadium that's not fully built, set up, whatever, does that mean that Southampton shouldn't have gone down? Like, come on. These clubs failed. They had 38 games to turn it around, and they failed. Get a
To
grip.
be honest,
That's my thoughts.
I think the only team that are really sort of like couldn't have the foot in is Leicester because they finished 17th. Sorry, 18th. And then the season before that, I think it was Burnley who finished that position, the last place to get relegated. So I think they're the ones with the league should have more of the standing, because if that 10-point production happened then in their seasons, whichever one it was, Everton would have gone down and they would have stayed up and kept the Premier League money. I know there is parachute payments, but it's better to be in the Premier League than not, especially when you're trying to build a squad. Players want to come and play in the Premier League less than they want to go in the Championship.
Yeah.
And you could even argue it's cost managers' jobs as well.
Well, yeah, this is a factor of a lot of things, and I think this is why teams will take the legal action. I do agree that these teams obviously weren't good enough to stay up at the end of the day. It reminds me of, I know it's a different situation. It reminds me of the Sheffield United and West Ham situation in 2006, 2007, when West Ham stayed up with Tevez, who, for whatever reason, shouldn't have been allowed to
And
play.
Mascherano, wasn't it? As two of them, weren't it?
Tevez and Mascherano, and then of course they appealed. Sheffield United appealed that, despite the fact that they weren't very good all season anyway. And would say, we'd still be in the Premier League if it wasn't for that. And if I'm not mistaken, West Ham will find £5.5 million or something, which is a lot of money as a fine. That is an insane amount of money. But realistically, the punishment was Sheffield United didn't come back to the Premier League for 11, 12 years, got relegated again in that time. So there's that impact there. And I think this is why clubs do feel aggrieved. Everton had even put themselves under a form of salary cap with the Premier League in 2021. So, and it does, and you do argue that they didn't seem to learn their lessons then. And then of course they've got the takeover that looks like it's fallen through, which is actually probably a good thing, because I don't think these owners are that great. There's all sorts of issues they've got. You think of is it Usmanov? He's one of the got money in the club. His assets were frozen, I believe, over the political situation in Ukraine. So they've lost a lot of money through things that aren't necessarily their fault, especially if you take the pandemic into account. But obviously, I think a lot of this will raise, and Everton have made it clear, one, they're going to appeal, and two, they're going to keep a close eye on some other investigations that are taking place, which is where it leads to you two, because your two teams are involved in this, Chelsea and Man City, particularly Man City, who have already been accused have already been charged for more than 100 alleged breaches of the rules, but a verdict has yet to be reached. For whatever reason, I personally believe they're different situations, and they're a lot more harder to investigate. You think about it, City is a different team, it's a different club, different situations. Very similar, I think, probably to the Tevez situation here, where probably the rule doesn't exist yet. So what can you accuse that of? But Jamie, let's hear your thoughts on this. How will Everton feel if City do not get anything, or if how's the league going to feel as a whole if they feel it's one rule for one for another? Jordan will bring you in a minute with the Chelsea charges or situation. What are your thoughts on all of that? Because this is a big snowball effect. This could be.
Yeah, it could be. It could be what the Premier League are then going to sort of announce. I did see a funny stat today that if you take a 10-point deduction, sorry, can't speak, for all the charges like Everton have got for one charge, and you span it over sort of like the 15-year period that we've had the owners, we would have about 5 points per season, which could probably send us down each year. But we still would actually have a positive point overall on average. But look, I think no matter how the City one comes about, look, if City get no charges, no point deduction, no stripped away titles, no whatever consequences it could be, actually even including a fine, if they get a fine, everyone's going to say the words, the Premier League is corrupt. That's it. That'll be every single fan who are not Man City fans, and that'll be everyone who's not looked at any of the case. That's just what's going to happen. I've already seen TikTok saying pretty much the exact same, saying how could Everton be charged already and City haven't been? Well, actually, Everton's has been going on for a few years before City even got charged. So it's all. I think it doesn't matter because people's opinions are going to be City have cheated, guilty, done. They don't need to see the facts or evidence. I don't personally know. I'm not involved in it. However, the difference between us and Everton was we've been successful off it. So Everton, who've had a terrible time for the past few years, are getting fined for crap, really. Whereas at least I've seen, the pinnacle of football. And I said it to you two earlier, once they got charged. As a City fan, let's say we did get all the charges all thrown at the book. Let's say we got put down to National League that some people keep suggesting. I would not give a shit. I would still thank the owners for everything they've done because I've got the memories that no one can take off me. Doesn't matter, the Premier League could strip all the titles, UEFA, the lot. I wouldn't care because I've got to see my team play in a Champions League final twice, won one and lost one. I've seen the Aguero moment. I've seen the comeback against Villa. I've seen such great football. And it's something that personally, the stuff behind the scenes, I don't really care about. I care about what happens on the pitch, because that's why I watch football. That's why I've played football. That's what I care about. Whereas Everton haven't had that, which that's why I do feel for their fans in this situation. It's 100% not their fault, but at the end of the day, they're the ones who get punished most. And like Jordan, obviously, he's got the Chelsea charges. He's seen his team win 2 Champions Leagues, Premier Leagues, FA Cups, League Cups. He's got to see it all with his memories. And that's where you got to feel really bad for Everton because they're in this situation getting charged and it's been crap for them. So they've not had a good time. Plus this, it's just adding on to the fact of it. But to sort of go back to your question, Jordan, Reese, I don't think it will impact because I think they're different charges. Even though we've got so many, 115, I just think it's different. So there will be different criteria on what they do for what they're going to charge City with if they do.
Yeah, I think similar sentiments from me, to be honest. I think what this does set is a precedent that is a concern for Man City, for us, because I think before we'd almost sort of laughed and I guess brushed aside these charges, like, the Premier League will never. I know they have historically, but in more recent times, it's something we've seen down the English football pyramid, but it's not something we've seen in the Premier League. Because you think these clubs maybe have better lawyers, they have a better structure, they have better ways to fight these charges and basically prove their innocence. But what this does to me is it does set a precedent that actually, if needed, the Premier League will actually deduct the points. So I think there is a little bit of concern. But to Jamie's, two things. I think first of all, the fact that the fans are the ones suffering, and you do feel particularly bad in Everton's case. They've not had the trophies, they've not had the success, and I think Everton fan group put it perfectly, is that ultimately the people who broke the Premier League rule, this was their statements to the Premier League, the people who broke your rules are not the ones suffering. And it's true, because the fans, the players, the manager, they're the ones suffering for someone else's mistakes. So that is fundamentally wrong. And I do think this brings in a wider debate of where the blame, where the legal action should lie. In my opinion, it should lie on the owners who basically were responsible for the shit show, not the fans. But that's another debate, maybe for another day.
That's a whole legal topic of sort of like the business that is Everton Football Club and the owners. It probably will fall on Everton rather than the owners, just based on legal sort of the way it works.
Yeah.
But I do want to say with the Everton one though, on who's to blame, By the way, Everton were in agreement with 13 other clubs for these rules to be put in place. They did vote yes. City were ones that voted no. There were four or five other teams. So they knew the rules, they agreed to them, and they actually approved them. It's even more of like, I guess that's sort of to the owners. They've agreed to it, and they're getting caught out on it. So it's not looking not looking great for them in that aspect either.
Yeah. I mean, look, at the end of the day, the Everton fans didn't mind when Bashir was spending all this money anyway, right? You know, you expect the players to turn out well, and they haven't. Unfortunately, that's just what it is. So it's down to bad recruitment, down to bad, scouting, etc. So yeah, the fans do suffer, but they want it too. They want the money. So it's happened. It has happened. Unfortunately, it is what it is. It's a testament to me that factors like the financial fair play is a good idea. And it's a good idea because it stops this crazy overspending and teams that are living out their means, more importantly. Otherwise it gets worse. If you look at the situation with Bury, for example, that was a mess. If I know like we said, a lot of people have said, oh, why haven't Man City been charged? Quite simply, Everton have only been charged with one thing. Man City have 115 charges against them.
A lot of points to come deducted. What's that? £10 charge. 10
points
to charge.
Yeah, and this is why the system is so complex, because that's going to take a long time to look over. City will look for one reason as to why there's a fault in there, and that could bring the whole thing down. So that's why they haven't been charged yet. It's a lot of things to look over there. There are a lot of things to really uncover, hence why it will take a long time. And Everton, like I said, it was quite clear they only had one, and they basically said that they were guilty. So in terms of that, do we? I do agree. I think this is going to put a lot of pressure on the Premier League now. Pete, I know clubs will want a guilty verdict from City and Chelsea regardless. Personally, I think justice will prevail and the answer will be right, whatever they decide. Do you think that this is an example of why football needs an independent regulator? Because it looks like to me the Premier League are doing it to show why they can govern themselves. Do you two think that there needs to be an independent regulator in all of this?
Yes. Yeah, ultimately, yes. Again, I don't know too much about the exact process, the panel and everything, exactly how it works, but it does feel like someone needs to be impartial to a decision this important, rather than it being potential. I'm sure it's not, but some potential political agenda where they're trying to make an example out of clubs. So ultimately, it just has to come down to the facts and the figures. So I'd say yes, personally.
Well, isn't it like I thought? It says the Premier League have come out and said it's an independent commission has imposed the 10-point deduction. So I understand it's not fully independent like the regulator, but I see it hard to have a proper independent regulator really, because football's too big. You're gonna have people on there who support a club, it's very hard to find the people who want to do this and don't care about football at all. I think there's so much more complications. Then there could be, actual corruptness. I know, like obviously people say the Premier League's corrupt already. Like you heard Wolves singing it, heard it when they played us, heard it when they played Spurs. You got Everton saying it now, but I think it's difficult. If they did this at the start of the Premier League era, it would have been I think it would have been a smoother transition. But now I think it could be just too complicated to bring them in. I'm not saying that doesn't solve any of the problems, but to be perfectly honest, I don't fully agree with the FFP rules anyway, because I think it makes the rich get richer, really. And myself and Jordan, we've seen our clubs influenced with a lot of money before it properly got put in place. So it stops Newcastle spending to actually start competing for the title. I know they're doing well and getting into the top four, but it stops that. So I am against FFP in general, because I think if your owner can afford it, then it should be in place. There should be more. I think there's more regulation on the owners and how they're spent and how they're dealing with their money is more of a concern, I think. What is it? The fit and proper rule. I think that's got to be more of a. That's the one that's, I think, the more important rule and role, rather than the actual FFP, to stop clubs getting into messes like a Bury, for example. But with what you were saying, Reece, where it's only one charge for Everton and 115 for City, do you think that the Chelsea one will be wrapped up before the City case? Because it's Overshaw money being spent, and I guess it's not 115 cases. It's maybe one or two. I don't know. I don't know the exact details of it.
Yeah, I think it's more than possible. It could be wrapped up before then. I think they'll let the City one maybe go a little bit longer. So if they can start getting into the crust of that, that might give them a clearer idea of the Chelsea situation. But it should be. It should be wrapped up. I mean, I personally don't think much will come of that one. I don't think a points deduction or anything like that will happen. But yeah, I think it will be a bit sooner. I think what I found interesting is, yeah, this does put pressure on the Premier League now to show it doesn't need an independent regulator. It does. They have to act something. At the end of the day, people will feel if anything goes against them, the system is corrupt. If City get away, don't get any deductions, the league is corrupt. Unfortunately, the smaller teams will always get punished because realistically, they will be the ones that live outside their means. With an owner as rich as City, of course they can spend $1 billion if they want to. A guy who runs Bury, unless he's got $1 billion, he can't spend $1 billion. So he will live outside his means. So that's why it looks like the smaller clubs do foul, in my opinion, because they do live insanely outside of what they should be. I think FFP is a good idea. I am an advocate for the Super League as a whole in order to cut that division where the super rich teams can just have their league and get on with it, and then everyone else can enjoy a nice, even league. I do believe that, or an American system where we get rid of this idea and just everyone, does a draft or something. But that's a conversation for a different day. I think this is a real pivotal moment for the Premier League. I think this is a real pivotal moment for City and Chelsea, who will be looking nervously over their shoulder. I wouldn't be shocked if City start to collaborate more on this investigation now to try and make sure they are found innocent. That's not an accusation, as in, working close is what I mean. I think Everton will feel aggrieved, but I also look at it and think we're only 2 points away from survival. So it's not that drastic. You've not started the season on -10. You've not been given 20 or so where it looks like it's impossible to catch up. I just think it's an important moment to show that clubs are being punished when they should be punished. The fans may suffer, but unfortunately, we want them to spend the money. And this is an inevitable consequence. I want it to be a wake-up call for all clubs. And I want it to be a moment to show that the Premier League is controlling the monster that is actually created. They got themselves in this mess. It's now up to them to prove they can get themselves out of it.
Yeah, agreed. And I guess the final point I'd say on the charges is obviously this is a different charge, right? This is a breach of profit and sustainability. I don't recall ever seeing that around the Chelsea case. And with City, again, I mean, there's 115. I can't say I've sat there and gone through the 115, but we don't even know if this charge that Everton got done for is in the 115. So you have got to bear that in mind. It could be something completely different. And FFP charges are separate and different from these charges before everyone starts saying corruption. But before we wrap up, let's make a quick prediction. Do we think this will now result in Everton being relegated? I'll start, and I'm going to say no, but it's going to be tight. I think we're going to see similar scenes to what we saw with Lampard keeping him up. It's going to be tight. It's going to be nervy. But ultimately, I do think there's 3 worse teams with potentially 3 worse managers. So I'm going to say they're going to stay up.
I'd agree. Like I said, I think it's actually come at the perfect time. to get 10-point deduction. I think it's the perfect time. I think they're better than Luton. I think they're better than Sheffield United for certain. Burnley just haven't got going to what most people expected. I think they're better than them, and I think they're better than Bournemouth. And Fulham have also not looked that great this season. I think there's so many teams that the 10-point deduction doesn't fully matter. So even though they were sitting 14th, now 19th, I still think they'll be fine.
I think they'll be fine. They can sort it out in their next game, which is against Man United, and be out of the relegation zone if they win. I think what will worry them is if the teams around them go, let's spend in January. Let's spend because Everton probably can't. That's where it might become a problem. But I think they'll be fine. I think it'll be an us against them mentality. So I think they'll be just fine.
Well, that's actually one point, sorry, before we finish, is when City got charged, that was actually like a bit of a catalyst for our season, for us to go on and win the treble. Like before that, we weren't playing too great. We were still obviously in and amongst the title race, weren't playing that great. And then after we got that, it's like Pep got them all together and went, right, they're trying to, screw us. Let's just go and win on the football pitch. And that's exactly what he did. So it could bring them all together. Sean Dyche will definitely try and bring them closer together and say, come on, let's do this for the fans. They don't deserve this. Let's survive relegation. And I definitely see it happening.
Yeah. And in another positive note to end for Everton fans, if you're watching, there's only ever been, so obviously you're on 4 points after 12 games. There's only ever been one other team in Premier League history who has survived with 4 points at this stage in the season, and it was yourselves. So it was Everton in the 94-95 season. So you've been there, you've done it before, and maybe you can do it again. But as always, that wraps us up for another episode. You know the drill by now. Like, comment, and subscribe. You know the drill.